Welcome, everybody, back in to another edition of the Big Ten Show here on the Believe Podcast Network, 93.7 The Ticket. This is Believe in the Big Ten. As always, I am your host, Adam Carricker. I am joined once again, and I'm excited about this, by Mr. Rhett Lewis of the Big Ten Network, the NFL Network, Big Ten former football player, a guy who does a phenomenal job. How you doing today, Rhett?
Adam, great to be back here with you as we kind of forge ahead on Believe in Big Ten here, and excited to kind of pick up where we left off, in this month of May as we're kind of winding down here and gearing up for the summer. We'll get started and we'll start looking ahead to fall camps, and no better way to do that than kind of assessing the one player who maybe has as much to do with the success of each of these 18 teams that we're going to be talking about this year in the new Big Ten, than talking about those quarterbacks here, and excited to do that with you here today, my friend.
All right, the completely and utterly 1,000% biased part of me says that defensive end is the most important position on the field. Just this number one most important position on the field. Yeah. But the unbiased part of me says it might be quarterback. So maybe we should talk about the quarterbacks. How's that sound?
Maybe we should. That sounds great. And you know what? To your point, I would agree with you. Like, I think it's hard to say that there is one position that is maybe that is more valuable, more important. You could certainly make that argument with quarterbacks and with left tackles and with edge rushers and maybe even cornerbacks in today's football. But the player that touches the ball on every play, it's hard to argue with that fact that they have more to do with winning and losing and how your team kind of assesses their path forward in any given game than the quarterback. So, yeah, and there's quite a bit of turnover this year at that position, just as there was a year ago. I mean, last year, there were 12 of the 14 teams were breaking in new starting quarterbacks. It's not that far off this year, Adam.
So it's interesting, as I was going through 1 through 18 and I was making my list and coming up with my rankings, I was like, transfer. Yes. And then I actually made a note, not a transfer finally, with like an exclamation point, because it was so rare at that point in my list. It's funny because if you want to know how important quarterback is, everything you just mentioned revolves around the quarterback. Left tackles who can protect them, right tackles who can protect them, edge rushers who can get after the quarterback, DBs who can make their life a little bit harder. Okay. It all revolves around the quarterback in one way, shape, or form. So again, it's the second most important position right behind defensive end. Okay. All right. Let's give a shout out to our sponsors. As always, the Jacobson Seed Company. They're your healthy hybrid advantage, an independently owned, family-owned seed company since 1936. Also, Bonzel Pool. Check them out at bonzelpool.com. They've got your pools. They've got your hot tubs. They've got your saunas. If you need them taken care of, they can take care of your pools, hot tubs, saunas, bonzelpool.com. All right, Rhett.
Yeah.
I think we go 1 through 18. You want to go 18 through 1? How do you want to do this?
I think let's start at the top.
Okay,
I
go
think
ahead.
That's the best way to do it. And maybe let's break this thing up and kind of just start with our top 5. Okay. And then we can kind of pick and choose some highlights there from that list and see how we compare. So just to kind of set the stage for the way that I rank these guys out, I really placed a premium on experience, on production, especially in the Big Ten or at the Power 5 level. So keeping that in mind with guys that are, stepping into a starting role for the first time, even if we assume that they're going to be the starter and haven't been, officially named yet. I think, you look at that, you look at guys that are transferring in from lower levels, like the FCS level, like when we get to Max Brosmer in Minnesota. And then I think of like true freshmen right there in your neck of the woods with Nebraska. And then, I think about guys that are coming from, established Power 5 programs that are transferring into, big time programs here. And that's where I start at the very top. I just think it's going to be very difficult to make the argument that there is a quarterback that has a better pedigree coming into this season than Dylan Gabriel at Oregon. Obviously transferring in from Oklahoma after spending a pair of seasons there before transferring into Norman from UCF, where he was highly successful there. He was under Lincoln Riley's tutelage briefly, and then, as Lincoln was kind of departing, jumped in there at Oklahoma, did very well, and now joins an explosive offense up there in Oregon with what Dan Lanning has done there in that terrific offensive brain trust. So I just think he is a really good athlete. I think he's one of the best pure passers in the league already. And he's so experienced in, playing high-level college football, in dealing with a hostile environment there in Norman, in dealing with a hostile environment inside the pocket, right? And then finding ways to utilize the skill sets of the players around him and putting them all in good positions to make plays. I think he's a bona fide Heisman Trophy candidate. And I can't wait to see how he navigates this new Big Ten with Oregon this year. That's my one.
Right now, as we sit here at this point in time, I'm sure somebody would. I don't know how you put somebody else at number one right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a list out there somewhere with somebody else at number one, but not the majority. So that would certainly be in the vast minority. Yeah. Dylan Gabriel, everywhere he goes, he's had success. Young guy at UCF, then he goes to Norman, then he comes to Oregon. Well, he hasn't had success yet, but we vastly anticipate Oregon being a good team, him being a huge part of that. When I think of like point guards on the football field, I think of Dylan Gabriel. He's just a distributor, like you said, a pure passer. He is that guy that can get the ball to everybody and puts everyone in really good positions to succeed, like a really good point guard on a basketball team. So I'm not going to argue with you one iota. I think Oregon's a legit Big Ten championship contender, college football playoff team that can make a run, and Dylan Gabriel's probably going to end up in New York at the end of the year. All right, who you got two?
So at two, I think this player is in line for the biggest breakout season, not only in the Big Ten, but in the country.
All right.
Talking about Will Rogers, who transferred into Washington. Again, another new Big Ten school, right? Transferred into Washington, national championship runner-ups from a year ago with Michael Penix running that show. Obviously, they've got a lot to deal with in terms of replacing offensive skill position players, right? Having lost all three of their top receivers to the draft, and a couple other players, running back, tight ends as well. And not even mentioning the offensive line, which is going to go through a bit of an overhaul. But Will Rogers played, for Mike Leach, God rest his soul, before obviously that, Mike's untimely passing. And then they had that transition, right, this last year in Starkville. And, I don't know that he had the season that he wanted to have, but I think Will Rogers is supremely talented. He's got a lot of experience playing in a pass-heavy scheme, right, having mentioned the Leach background, right, and his background with Mike Leach. I think he is a true, live for football. He is a good old boy, which is kind of an interesting, an interesting situation now that he's going up to the Pacific Northwest. But I think his love for football, his love for competing, and his love for, throwing a ball around the yard is going to really, take center stage, and is not going to have to worry about all the other stuff that is maybe new or different to him, from being up in Seattle. I think he is a terrific passer. I've got to see him in person a couple of times down at the Manning Passing Academy. Again, he's just a dude that a lot of people kind of gravitate towards. He's one of those kind of magnetic type of players at the quarterback spot. So Jed Fish, terrific offensive coach, obviously was in the league, did great work down in Arizona. Now he brings his scheme up to Washington, and then Will Rogers, who had decommitted, then committed back to Jed. That's where they're going. It's going to be Will Rogers. We'll get to Will Howard in a minute. But Will Rogers, I think, could be one of the breakout players in the country this year. And I like what he's got in store up in Washington this year.
So my number 2 through 5 was tough for me.
Okay.
I think who the 2 through 5 is, we're probably going to agree largely in part on, but how I ranked them was tough for me. I will readily admit, I think this next guy's a good football player. But I will readily admit, part of this ranking is the team around him. The backfield, Chip Kelly being the OC, the talent of wide receiver, the team as a whole. Not that he's not a good football player in his own right, because he is. Okay, that is Will Howard of Ohio State. This is a guy who can make plays. Was it you that likened him to Duggan from TCU?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I see some of that in him, and I like that.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that he can make plays with his legs. I like the fact that I think he's going to kind of fit what Chip Kelly wants to do with a little bit more mobile quarterback. I think the talent around him is really good. I think he's a good football player. Adrian Martinez was a starter at Kansas State. He gets hurt. Never really got his starting job back because of this guy. Okay. This guy ended up losing his starting job eventually to a freshman. So it kind of goes both ways. I've got him number 2, and I think his numbers are going to be good. I think he's going to produce a lot. I think He's a good football player. I think a lot of that has to do with the team surrounding him. I will readily admit, not that he's not good in his own right, but that's why I have Will Howard of Ohio State at number 2.
Yeah, and he's my number 3, so we're not far off on that, right?
Yep.
And so, look, I think Will Howard steps into a phenomenal situation, just in terms of what's there around him, as we've been talking about, right? With all the skills, and look, I think they're going to run the ball a bit more than we've seen in recent years at Ohio State. Now, that's always a part of the program there in Columbus, but I think with Quinshon Judkins coming in from Ole Miss, with TreVeyon Henderson coming back after a year in which he could have left for the NFL, I think is huge. It's arguably the best backfield in the country this year. So I think he'll do a fair amount of handing off. Now, he can run the football too, and that's where I see like the Duggan comparison. He's a competitor. He's a physical runner, right? He's not a kind of flash and pizzazz type of runner. I think the guys will really rally around him. I think he's that type of player. The reason I put Gabriel and Rodgers in front of them is I think they're better passers. I think they're better throwers of the football at this point.
I agree with
that. And I don't mean that to be a slight. That's not to say that he's not good. He's not a good thrower. He's not going to be a good quarterback in a pass game. I just think they're better. That's why I have them ahead of him. But I think with Ohio State's, brain trust scheme, the way they want to operate, and I think it fits what he wants to do. And he's got an opportunity to go out there and have a whale of a year. And we might be talking about him, in a really positive light in the spring when the draft talk comes around. If he really, kind of takes that offense by the reins or by the horns and really puts up some big numbers.
I think you made a really good point about how he plays and how he runs. I'm not calling Ohio State soft, but Michigan has pushed them around. Michigan pushes a lot of people around. So that's not really an insult, but he may bring that little physicality, that little Max Duggan-esque type presence, as you alluded to, and that may reverberate throughout the entire football team and help uplift the entire team, just like I think the whole team's going to uplift him.
Yeah.
All right. Next on my list is a guy who, former 5-star recruit, number 1 quarterback in the entire country, 2022, Mr. Football in the state of Ohio, a guy who has the potential to be the top quarterback in the entire Big Ten Conference. Not until he finds some sort of consistency, not until he gets some help from his receivers.
Oh, yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, Mr. Drew Allar here at Penn State. Okay. Now, it's interesting because he was the number 1 quarterback in his recruiting class. Julian Fleming comes over from Ohio State, the number 1 wide receiver in his class. Neither one of them have quite lived up to that billing yet.
Right.
Maybe the pairing of the two of them together could be just what the doctor ordered for both of them. He's one of those guys. It doesn't help that I watched the spring game. He didn't look good in the spring game. And I was like, oh, come on, man.
Yeah.
Like, I'm rooting for this guy.
Yeah.
All right. So he's one of these guys that could end up maybe the number 1 quarterback in the Big Ten. He could potentially drop out of the top 5. I don't think he does that.
Yeah.
But he's one of those guys that the ceiling is high, the floor is a little bit lower. I'm as intrigued by him as I am any player in the entire Big Ten Conference, honestly. I have him, what do I have him, third? I have him third simply because I do think he breaks out. I do think bringing over the OC from Kansas is big. I do think him and Julian Fleming are going to be a great pairing. As we alluded to last week, they've had some receivers leave. Maybe that's because they see the writing on the wall of who's going to get a lot of those reps at receiver this fall. But I got Drew Allar, number 3. Who's next on your list?
Right there, Drew Allar, number 4.
Yep.
And so I was talking to a Penn State beat writer recently, and we were, kind of talking about, what Drew had done this spring and how he's going to benefit from Andy Kotelnicki coming over from Kansas and joining Penn State to run that offense. I think that offense will be more vertical this year in terms of pushing the ball down the field, maybe a little bit more explosive. But I think the way that the Penn State fan base has viewed Drew Allar is maybe a little bit out of control, right? And part of that is because what you mentioned, incredible pedigree coming in, right? All the hype coming in, 5-star guy, he's the next dude. He's going to be the quarterback that takes Penn State, over the hump, that gets them over, that Ohio State and Michigan mountain that they have been, yet to really climb and summit in the last few years. And it'll be an opportunity for Penn State to win a national title. So all that hype and all that expectation, I feel like has really, maybe cast a shadow over what he has been as a player. And so this was a great line that was told to me by this beat writer, I believe it was Ben Jones. And we were talking. He goes, Drew Allar, not as good as people expected, but much better than people give him credit for.
That's fair.
Right. And so that kind of brings the expectations into focus there. And so like, let's give this guy who, by the way, was a first-year starter last year, right? He was the guy that people were clamoring for, even while Sean Clifford was winding down his extended career at Penn State, right? In fact, after they lost to Ohio State and Michigan, you had everybody saying, all right, it's time to play Drew Allar. Like, sit Clifford, the season's over. Like, just settle down for a second. Settle down here. So I think Drew, we talk about fit a lot when we're talking about projecting players from college to the NFL, and especially quarterbacks. Fit with the play caller, fit with the playmakers, and fit with the scheme. This might be the fit that Drew Allar really needs to unlock all that potential that you were talking about, that the fan base has been talking about. So I'm really curious to see it. And I think it could be one of the great success stories of college football this year, both with Allar and with Julian Fleming. And then, of course, the guy who's pulling all the controls, and Andy Kotelnicki is the guy who's spearheaded this success. So let's see if that does come to fruition. But I have him, Drew Allar, 4th. And I think he's got a chance to really rise. I mean, he's got all the talent to be the top dude in this conference when it's all said and done. Now he's got to put it all together.
He does need a little bit more help from his receivers. There was not a lot of separation from wide receivers versus opposing DBs last year. If you watch that Ohio State game, oh man, they had a hard time throwing the ball past 10 yards downfield because like the Ohio State DBs were all over them. All right. Number 4, I've got Miller Moss, USC. This is a guy, 4-star recruit, number 12 quarterback in the 2021 recruiting class. And so the initial thing is, well, Lincoln Riley turns every quarterback into a Heisman Trophy winner and number 1 overall pick. So yes, he has a lot of success with quarterbacks. Miller Moss, incredibly talented. There's no reason can't have a whole lot of success. No reason this can't just continue. Okay, the young quarterback went off in USC's bowl victory over Louisville, 23 of 33 passing, 372 yards, 6 touchdowns, only 1 interception. Looked really good. And that was supposed to be a pretty decent Louisville team as well. I think you mentioned last week, maybe they aren't quite the same, at the skill positions as they've been recently on offense there at USC. But I don't see any reason he can't finish as a top 3, 4, 5 quarterback in the Big Ten Conference. I think Miller Moss is set up to have potentially a great season. I got him number 4.
Yeah, you'll hear from Miller Moss not too long, not too much later here on my list, but he's not at number 5. So just to recap, I had Dylan Gabriel 1, Will Rogers 2, Will Howard 3, Drew Allar 4, and at 5 for me, and this might take a lot of people by surprise, and I'm going to get a lot of the Homer talk here because I am an Indiana alum.
It's coming.
I've played at IU from 2001 to 2005. And now I have seen, and I was on the call for the IU spring game where Curtis Rourke made his first real impression on Indiana football fans inside Memorial Stadium, inside the Rock there in Bloomington, Indiana. Now, before we started this list, I gave you I prefaced it by saying I am valuing production and experience over potential and, let's say, pedigree and, let's say, star rating and all that, right? So Curtis Rourke in 2022 was the MAC Player of the Year. Okay, look, MAC is not the Big Ten, but it is a good conference, and they play some good ball there, right? And I think Curtis Rourke is a big dude. He's 6'5". He runs the ball a little bit, not a lot. But he also tore his ACL at the end of that 2022 season. And so 2023 felt like it took a little bit for him to find, his legs again and to find his stride and to get comfortable and to knock some of that rust off and to kind of feel good about where he was. And so he didn't quite have the numbers that he had in 2022. So I think he kind of fell off people's radar a little bit, which allowed, once he went into the transfer portal for his final year of college football, which will be this year, will be a one and done at IU. I think Curtis Rourke brings a championship type of pedigree, right? They were MAC champions back in 2022. He was the Player of the Year. He's got prototypical size. He's got a really good arm. He sees the field well. He's seen a lot of football now. Now you can make the argument about what level it was at and all that, but he's a mature competitor as well. This guy's married. He's got a lot, on his plate in terms of understanding, all that's in front of it, right? All that comes along with being the face of a program and with being a program quarterback that way. So I think that he's going to be a really good fit with Mike Shanahan and Tino Sinceri's offense. Those two guys, co-offense coordinators. Mike's the play caller, but Tino, was a quarterback at Pittsburgh. He's been a coach now in college football for a bunch of years, and they've been together for a while at James Madison, following Curt Cignetti over to Indiana in this first-year coaching staff there in Bloomington. So Curtis Rourke, I think, is going to open some people's eyes if he does win the job. Now, it hadn't been given to him yet, and I will say that Taven Jackson, who was a four-star quarterback and initially started his career at Tennessee, transferred into Indiana last year, started out really hot and then kind of fizzled a little bit as the season kind of got off the rails for IU. But Taven has got a lot of potential there too, and I'm not counting him out of this competition. But I think, if Curtis Rourke does win that job, I think he's got an opportunity to be one of the better top half of the league quarterbacks this year in the Big Ten. So he is my number 5. Where'd you go?
I'm with you. That quarterback battle at Indiana is going to be fun to watch. Yes. I mean, I'm going to give the edge to Curtis Rourke. Okay. Yeah. And he is on my list. He's in the top 10.
Yep.
All right. It's interesting. We almost agreed 100% on 1 through 5.
Yeah.
Almost.
We had 4 of the 5. We were right.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
And we did not talk before this. We knew the topic, and that was clearly it. Honestly, you sent me your list, and I purposely have not looked at it because I didn't want to be influenced.
Nice. Yeah. Good.
So your text is actually, I think I just looked at it this morning. I was like, I can't look at the actual list though. So we're completely independent, yet seems to be a lot of crossover agreement here. 1 through 5, 1 through 4, 1 through 5. I think most people are going to be in the ballpark of one another. I think 6 through 13 is wide open. 6 through 13. I mean, I got Cade McNamara at 13. I could see somebody putting him at 6. I'm getting ahead of myself. I got Dylan Raiola at 6. I could see somebody being like true freshman. No, he's 12. Yeah. So it could be all over the place, 6 through 13. I thought 14 through 18, was kind of like 1 through 5. Just how do you rank them? But I thought it was pretty easy for those guys, for me, in my opinion, anyways. So number 5, I have Will Rogers. I think one thing we do a little bit different is I think I look at the surrounding situation, and I look at the schedule. I think that factors a little bit more into my ranking. So when you look at Will Rogers, you just look at him, top 3 in the Big Ten, in my opinion. You had him at 2, I believe.
2, yeah.
But I have him at 5. Okay, Washington just playing the national championship game, phenomenal football program, only 2 starters back, really tough schedule. Welcome to the Big Ten. I know he was committed to DeBoer, then he goes to Bama, and then he ends up coming back to Washington anyways. He's a really talented passer, did great under Mike Leach, struggled a smidge last year, but I do think he still brings that same ability, talent, potential to Washington. I just think Washington's going to struggle. I think they're just going to have a rough year. If they have a decent year, it's because of him.
Yeah.
I mean, I have him number 5. If it was what I felt to be, I mean, they lost more players than any other team in the Big Ten. The 2 teams that lost the most amount of players in the Big Ten starters wise anyways were the 2 teams in the national championship game.
Exactly right.
Washington.
Exactly
so
right. Most of them
that's the only that's the only reason I don't have him higher. Not that 5th is bad at all, but I've got him 5th on the list. Who do you got next?
Yeah, so at number 6, I'm going to go on the other side of the Old Oak and Bucket rivalry with my alma mater, Indiana, and that is the team that is up north and west of Bloomington in West Lafayette. Hudson Card returning to Purdue for another year. Remember, he transferred in from Texas and had his first year for the Boilermakers under new head coach Ryan Walters last year. And I thought there were some flashes of brilliance from Hudson Card. Started off, and I know they had some tough losses. They ended up getting a non-conference win in Blacksburg against Virginia Tech after like an 8-hour rain delay. So there were some things where you could see all right, this dude is a guy that can help bring this team together, can be a leader for this team, and he's got a good arm. I think the thing that really sets him apart, and one of the things that that I really appreciate about him, is his maneuverability within the pocket. I think he is a wizard back there. And I watched it in person in the Old Oak and Bucket game this year. He got out of no lie, and this is going to sound like hyperbole and like an exaggeration, Adam, but he got out of 12 sacks. Should have been sacks against Indiana in that season finale. And I think he he's got a real competitive streak in him. And I think that team really likes him. I know Ryan Walters really likes him. I think their team is going to be better around him this year. They've done some work in the transfer portal. They tried to beef up the offensive line a little bit. And I think they've got some good skill position players. They lose Tyrone Tracy, which is a tough one. Running back, kind of wide receiver mix. But I think that they've got, and Hudson Card has what it takes in Graham Harrell's offense, where they're going to throw the ball around a little bit. They're going to really put the ball in his hands and put the game on his shoulders. And I think he is poised to have his best year of his collegiate career. And I think Purdue is bowl eligible because of Hudson Card and what he does on the offensive side of the ball this year. So I've got him at number 6.
It's fun to watch all these former Texas Tech quarterbacks from when Mike Leach was with the Red Raiders. Graham Harrell, Cliff Kingsbury, obviously head coach of the Cardinals for a few recent years. Okay. Just to watch them and what they're doing now. Now, as a guy who played against that Texas Tech offense, I don't miss it. Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about pocket awareness. Yeah, 2 of the toughest guys I ever had to sack are 2 of the greatest of all time. So let me say that first. But 2 of the slowest quarterbacks you'll ever see: Tom Brady, Peyton Manning. Yes, Manning never had a good O-line. No. I was licking my lips. Yeah. Never sacked him once. Never even came close. He gets rid of the ball too freaking quick. Yeah. Brady held on to it just a smidge longer, so you felt like you had a chance, but he would move at just the right moment. Just the right moment. Like, how do you even see me? Like, it's like I'm talking to my kids. I got eyes in the back of my head. He's got eyes in the back of his helmet. Just that pocket awareness and maneuverability was insane. Yeah. Okay, so at number 6, and again, this is where 6 through 13, I think we're going to be all over the place. Okay. So I have Dylan Raiola. And you can yell Homer at me. Yeah, that's fine. I'll absorb it. And here's why. I take what happened with the spring game at Nebraska with a grain of salt. He looked great. A couple 300 yards passing, touchdowns, long bombs. The game was a little bit set up to be that way. Matt Rule even said, we want to air it out. I think he wanted people to feel good going into the offseason, wanted the quarterbacks to have some confidence going in. It would just kind of set up that way. And Dylan Raiola, he looked really freaking good. Heinrich Harburg, the backup, looked really good as well. Okay, so here's why I have him as high as I do. And again, he could be 6, he could be 13. I don't know what the true freshman. There's so many freaking question marks. He hasn't even technically been named the starter yet. Okay, right. He is expected to be the guy. I have him there because Jamal Banks, okay, wide receiver from Wake Forest, one of the best receivers in the entire ACC. You got Isaiah Nayor, who transfers in from Texas, who was going to be their top guy till he hurt his knee. He's back 100%. 6'3", 6'4" wide receivers. At tight end, you got Thomas Fidone, the number 2 tight end recruit in the entire country. The year he came out, okay, 6'6". You got an offensive line with 7 guys who've started over 150. I believe it's 152 career starts. You've got a loaded running back room with no clear starter yet, so somebody's got to separate in fall camp. You got a defense with 10 returning starters from a top 15 unit in the country last year. So he shouldn't have to put up a bunch of points, which should take the pressure off of him. He should have an O-line, maybe a run game that can help him. I haven't even gotten into him yet. The 2 wide receivers that are very talented, their speed as well. But you look at him, okay, for most of his recruiting cycle, he was the number 1 player in the entire country, ended up being a 5-star number 2 quarterback in the entire country. He's a guy with big-time arm talent. He's a guy who was there for spring, which is huge. He is an individual who has started in 3 different offenses in his last 3 years of high school, so he knows how to learn an offense quick, play well. Now you get into him. You just watch him. I've obviously had the chance to watch him in practice. Cool, calm, confident, making checks at the line of scrimmage that you don't see some guys in the NFL doing. He was doing in spring ball. Okay. Every once in a while, a little bit of hero ball steps in. Okay. And that's a lot of that I see as confidence, but we got to learn when to do that and when to be smart. And that's where the question mark comes in. So his talent is off the charts. His inexperience is 0 at this point. The talent around him helps. And here was the final thing that gave me a little bit of comfort. Games 1 through 7, the best defense they're going to play is Rutgers. Okay. Good program. Love what Shiano's doing. Okay. But they're not like, Penn State or Ohio State when it comes to talent and overall defensive production that's returning. The best team they're probably going to play, who knows, Colorado. I mean, maybe they're in the CFP. Maybe they're 3-9 again. Right. I don't know. You blow a 29-point lead at halftime at home to frickin' Stanford. I don't know how you do that. I don't know what to make of them. But they don't want to play defense. I know that. I they don't care about defense. So he really doesn't play a good defense until game 8. So he's going to have time to learn, grow, and develop. Anyways, Homer, Dylan Raiola 7. Who you got?
I think you really laid out, because I have a couple of follow-ups for you on Dillon, because I think he is one of the really intriguing pieces of the conference this year, right? There's, been the, first it was Ohio State, then it was Georgia, now it's Nebraska. But were you teammates with Dom, with his dad?
He was a little bit before me. By the time I got to the league, he was with the Lions on the latter half of his career. He was before me.
Got it. Before you. Okay. I think that is something to consider, right? Is understanding the family pedigree a little bit. And, this is not just any true freshman. This is a true freshman whose dad was a stud at that very university there in Lincoln at Nebraska, and who has played in the league and has played at the highest level and knows what it takes to win. Not to mention, uncle on the coaching staff and the whole thing. Like, you got all that there. There's some built-in comfortability there, which I think you don't get with a lot of, true freshmen who may not have those types of family, connections, right? The thing that I would ask that and since you've had a chance to see him in practice, what's his command like? You talked about at the line of scrimmage, and that's important. Understanding, what he needs to do from a quarterback, mechanically and then mentally. But what are his teammates? Like as you mentioned, you got a bunch of returning starters on defense. You got some returning starters on offense, some older veteran guys who are coming in here and trying to rally around an 18-year-old freshman. Has that dynamic been what you would expect?
I was curious to see that, because when you see, he's basically, he walked into a youth basketball facility about 2 months ago, and you would have just thought it was like Brad Pitt that walked in or something like that. Like, how do you handle that? Okay. Is there an entitlement that creeps in? No, he's in the facility at 6 a.m. every day, according to Matt Rule. Is there an arrogance? Haven't seen it. He's crying before the spring game because it's his lifelong dream coming true to play at Nebraska, even though it's a practice, but it's a spring game. Yeah. Okay. So I haven't seen any of that. So I don't see I don't want to say arrogant. I've seen highly recruited guys come in arrogant and turn people off. I haven't seen any of that. You got to also, guys seem to like, this is our guy. And again, Harburg's in that room. Daniel Kalen's in that room, a highly touted freshman as well. You just got to look at the numbers. There's a 66 and 2/3 chance we're going to have a true freshman starting, regardless of the talent situation, because two of them are true freshmen. So I think the team's kind of like, all right, we're probably going to have a true freshman starting. Maybe it's Harburg, but if not, it's a true freshman. And so we need to rally around these guys. And he's got that calm, confident demeanor. Okay. Like, I don't know that he's like the most vocal guy in the world. It's not that he's quiet, but it's like, I know what I'm doing. Okay. Type of just demeanor. Okay. About him. And I think the guys, it doesn't come across as cocky at all. It comes across as, I feel confident. Let's do this. And I think they're looking to somebody to be that leader. It's going to be a true freshman probably. And so I think so far, so good anyways.
So I think that's important that you mention all that, right? Because those are the type of things that we don't get a chance to see. Those are the types of things that, Matt Rule can talk about, but we don't know, if he's sugarcoating anything, you know what I mean? So like understanding that you've seen it with your own eyes, I think is important to note for all the listeners out there as well. The other thing on the Nebraska quarterback situation is like, there was a lot, maybe not a lot. There was a good deal of play and production to like from Heinrich Haarberg last year, who helped salvage a season that seemed like it was going off the rails, after the whole Jeff Sims thing didn't quite work out. And then, Heinrich comes back in as a native son of Nebraska, right? I mean, he's a Nebraska guy through and through. Were you surprised at all now, knowing that he's got the gravitational pull to that state and to that school is obviously big. Were you surprised at all that, he stuck around instead, because I think he put some good tape out there and might have had an opportunity to go somewhere else and be, maybe more of a chance to go out there and actually win a starting job. Were you surprised that he stuck around?
So originally at the end of the year, it was Haarberg, it was Purdy were the two guys that we anticipated coming back, Chubba Purdy. And then Daniel commits, and then Raiola commits. And so you're thinking it's going to be those four guys, and then Purdy enters the transfer portal in December, and we have not added a quarterback since. Right. So if I'm Haarberg, I'm looking around and I'm like, yes, I see these two talented guys. I see all the hoopla, and I mean that in the positive sense surrounding Dillon specifically. But I got to think, if I get better, like if I'm Haarberg, I got a chance to start. I got a chance to make an impact. We'll see what happens. If you watched Haarberg last year, I don't know how you don't love the guy. He played hard. He's much faster than you'd anticipate. He runs physical. I'm just going to be blunt, and I can say this because I've said it a million times, and I love the guy. His throwing mechanics were awful. They were awful. And I watched him as a true freshman. He was the most impressive throwing quarterback on the field that day. Adrian Martinez was there. Luke McCaffrey was there. Okay. Adrian's lighting up the UFL. McCaffrey was as a receiver, but drafted into the NFL in his last NFL draft. Harburg was the guy who stood out to me on that particular day. Wow. And I also remember they did half gas at races. He won. Yeah. He beat those same two guys as well.
Wow.
And so I was like, man, this guy's got a good arm. And what I kept talking about was he's faster than everybody realizes, because I thought the passing was taken for granted.
Yeah.
Then after chatting with his dad, he basically the next season, he wasn't even in the quarterback rooms. He wasn't in the meetings. He wasn't taking reps. He was just running scout team stuff.
Well, that was a Mark Whipple thing, right? When he came in.
Whipple, Frost, whatever you want to look at.
Call it. Yeah.
So he not only didn't get better, he clearly regressed. And the guy I saw throwing last year, I said it a million times. If you're a Nebraska fan, you heard me say it to nauseum because it was true. His mechanics were not good. He's got to get better. He's at least got to get back to what he was 2 years ago as a true freshman. In the spring game, throughout the spring, he's clearly passing better. He's actually been getting quarterback reps, which shockingly actually helps you get better as a quarterback and throw.
Turns out it does.
Yes. So I think that's been huge for him. So I think from his perspective, there's a couple of things. Number one, I have a chance to earn the starting job. Number two, I have a chance to be a leader on this team. Number three, he's a Swiss Army knife. Okay, Dylan moves great within the pocket. You talk about guys within the pocket. He moves great within the pocket. Daniel moves good, true freshman, learning. Okay, not necessarily going to take off and run so much. But Harburg can be that Swiss Army knife. He can be the Taysom Hill. Okay, he can be the backup quarterback if he doesn't start. Yeah. He can do, I don't know that we need more tight ends. Okay, we got Fedoni and Berkshire. But he can do some things there. You can do some trick plays. He can come in and run some read option, keep the defense honest. There's so many things he can do. I wasn't shocked. Once Purdy transferred and we didn't bring anyone else in,
that's right.
I'll be honest, Rule's sitting there praying none of them transfer, because then we'd be down to 2 and we would be hurting. Luckily, they've all stayed.
Yeah. Well, and the reason I brought that up is because I think it's such a great value now for this program and for this offense to have a player who has started games, who has won games.
Yep.
If in fact Dylan wins the starting job, and look, let's just say that, the freshman has some hiccups, early on, and you need to settle him down a little bit. You've got somebody you can trust to jump in there and go in there and at least keep you competitive in games, even in big games against big time opponents. So I say all that. I think Nebraska's in a good spot there from the quarterback spot. You've got the elite future of the program, unquestioned, I think at this point, Dylan Raiola. And then you've got a guy, who loves the program and can bring some value even when he's not behind center in Heinrich Harburg. So I love that part. All right. So you had asked me who my 7 was.
Yep.
My 6 was Hudson Card from Purdue. My 7 is a guy who I believe was your number 4 in Miller Moss. Miller Moss at USC, who the college football world came to know, right, in that bowl game, as you mentioned, against Louisville, where he went absolutely insane, throwing at Taj Washington and Brendan Rice, both of whom are playing in the NFL now after getting drafted. So Miller Moss threw the 6 touchdowns. It was like, holy smokes, like this dude, we're getting a chance to see some of that, that potential that we thought when they recruited him down there from Southern California to stay there and play at USC. And what I want to know is, okay, that performance showed us potential. Now, can you show us consistency that will give you the production that you need to be successful in the new Big Ten with this highly competitive 18-team league? Now, are you a flash in the flip side of that question is, are you a flash in a pan, right, with 6 touchdowns in a bowl game, playing against a Louisville team that definitely didn't have all their guys, but neither did USC, all that stuff? Or are you the next in line in a long line of quarterbacks to be phenomenally productive under Lincoln Riley at the collegiate level and then go on to play in the league? I think that's where the question is. So I got to watch the spring game in person. And first off, I was impressed in talking with Miller Moss after the game. The offense did not play well that day. And again, like, as you said, with Raiola's positive performance, you take it with a grain of salt, also on the negativity side as well, because it was not a good day for the USC offense. They turned the ball over 5 times. Miller Moss threw 2 interceptions. But the thing that's interesting is, he's got 1 game of starting experience. They bring in Jaden Maeva from UNLV, who has more starting experience and played probably better in that spring game. Now, whether you want to, you got to put the whole body of work, into consideration. I think everybody believes still that Miller Moss is going to be the starting quarterback week 1 for USC. He's certainly going to be given, every opportunity to be that guy. Does he hang on to it? Or, if the turnovers, start showing up, then you've got a guy back here who's got a big time pedigree, who, by the way, had offers from Georgia, and Maeva from UNLV. So you've got somebody over your shoulder here. Now, if you're Moss, you can use that, right? You can either use that as pressure, or you can use it to ignite that competitive fire and to bring out the best in you. I believe it'll bring out the best in him. I think he's a talented dude. And while I don't think they are as talented from a skill position, perspective as they were maybe a year ago or 2 years ago, I think it's enough. It's always, you're always going to be in a position to succeed in a Lincoln Riley offense. So I think he's got every opportunity. I think he is a good passer. I don't know that he's going to run it around that much, but I think I want to see him distribute the football and take care of the football, and they'll be off and running, scoring points. So I've got Miller Moss at 7. Where are you going?
There were 2 quarterbacks on this list that I was the most nervous about. Okay. The first one was Miller Moss. Man, I'm putting a lot of faith in that bowl game. And bowl games
I think everyone is.
They're such a crapshoot right now, because half the time it's not even the same team. Right. But I think what the trump card for me was Lincoln Riley and just what he's done. But that still makes me really nervous. So the fact that you have him at 7 makes me even more nervous. The next guy that has me the most nervous based on where I have him ranked is Tyler Van Dyke of Wisconsin. Okay. And again, 6 through 13, man, it was like a coin toss, just trying to figure out where to put people. Okay. Yeah. At Miami, 11 games a year ago, 219 of 33 passing, 2,703 yards. Okay, 8.1 yards per attempt, 19 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. Got to take care of the ball better. You've got to have a 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio just to be considered a good quarterback to begin with, let alone anything better or above that. This is a guy who has talent, 4-star recruit. Now, a lot of these guys are highly recruited guys. Honestly, I've never thought of the Big Ten as kind of like a quarterback talent-rich league before. I do think it helps. I do think it helps when you bring in some of the West Coast teams, which tend to be more offense first than defense second. Okay, whereas the Big Ten has run the ball, play good defense. So it wasn't always prioritizing the quarterbacks. But you look at Tyler, 4-star recruit, number 7 quarterback in the 2020 class. Now, he makes me nervous. I think the potential is there. I think I'm putting faith in Luke Fickell, Wisconsin, the run game around him, the defense to support him, taking pressure off of him so that he doesn't have to take chances. And hopefully over the course of the season, that allows his talent, to build some confidence in his talent to rise to the top. I'm sticking with him at 7. I'm not wavering. I just don't have 1,000% confidence. Who do you got next?
So I like your points on Tyler Van Dyke. I'll save mine for when he comes up a little bit later, and it feels like we're going to get through about half this list, and then have to save the second half for our next episode. That'll be the tease for you. He'll be in our next episode.
Okay, there you go.
There's a tease. But at number 8, I'm going with Cade McNamara from Iowa. So the Cade McNamara offense never really got off the ground. The offense in general has not gone off the ground for years now in Iowa City. Everyone knows that, well documented. We don't need to dig into that. New offensive coordinator comes in. It's Tim Lester. He comes over, bringing his system, which I think is very important, right? Because, obviously the Ferences have been running the offense in Iowa City for, decades now. Brian, obviously the last few years, it just hadn't worked out. Haven't scored points, haven't been able to stay on the field. They've been punting the ball a ton. But I think, but they still win 9-10 games, right? And so I think there's less on Cade McNamara this year than maybe any other quarterback. They've got a formula that wins. They play really good special teams. They play phenomenal defense. And I think they're going to be better on offense this year. I think the scheme will bring a fresh kind of outlook and perspective with everybody on that team. I think they've got some good skill position players there too. So I just think a healthy Cade McNamara now, solid, not flashy, can turn around, hand the ball off, can take care of the football, can keep you competitive in games. He's not going to lose you games. I don't know how many he's going to go out there and win. But maybe this offense, this new offense and new scheme kind of allows us to see more of Caden McNamara than we've seen previously in his career, because he was in a similar situation at Michigan, right? They weren't asking him to throw the ball all over the place, right? Turn around, hand it off. So I like Caden McNamara. Solid, not flashy. I think they've still got an opportunity to win 10 games with him. He is my number 8 quarterback here.
They absolutely have a chance to win 9-10 games in Iowa again this year. Man, it's interesting because I brought this up last week. I think he actually has the most pressure on him of the Big Ten. And your case for the opposite, because of defense and special teams, and they win either way. Yeah. And it's just like, that's a phenomenal case for there not being pressure. Yeah. I think for me, I see a guy who lost his job at Michigan, transferred to Iowa to prove something, had the worst offense in the country last year. He did get hurt. He's bouncing back. I just feel like if you're a competitor, you'd have something to prove. But he'll be in the show for next week. So there's my little plug for next week as well.
There it is.
Okay. For Michigan, well, there you go. Number 8, I have Alex Orji. Okay. And I know you got to keep an eye on Jaden Davis as well, who's a 4-star recruit, number 9 quarterback. Again, another highly touted quarterback coming into the Big Ten 2024 class. Alex Orji is a guy we chatted about a bit last week. He's very raw, very talented, very athletic. How does he develop? What do they do around him? What do they ask of him? If it's similar to what they asked of J.J. McCarthy, just using his legs a little bit more, I think he can be successful. I think a tough schedule is going to make it hard on him if he is indeed the starter, okay, because he's got to still outright win that job, I would think, in fall camp. Again, he's another guy with a high ceiling, can make a lot of big plays. What can you really expect out of him in this first year, though, if he's the starter, as the starter? So I have him at number 8 because Michigan, okay, I do. He's probably not going to have a ton thrown on his plate. Coach Moore is going to keep that Harbaugh way going. He understands it well, and I think that's going to help him. The schedule makes me nervous, okay, because Michigan does have a tough schedule, but I'm sticking with Alex at number 8.
Yeah, look, and I think you make a great case for it. I really do. I think he'll be a little bit further down in my list. But again, that's because I was really, again, valuing experience and production previously in college football at this level. And look, that's totally fine. From your perspective there as well. So final guy for today on my list, top 9. Now, he's a little short in experience, but gave us glimpses of high-level quarterback play at a Power 5 conference, even though that conference no longer really exists. Talking about Aiden Childs from Michigan State. And I think, again, the comfortability with Jonathan Smith coming over from Oregon State to Michigan State, bringing Childs with him, I think all of that sets you up for some success. I mean, he is a dynamic player, right? A dual threat type of guy, a playmaker at his core. And look, Michigan State has a ton of athletes. They've always got, a talented roster. It's just they haven't always been able to put it together, right? Mel Tucker got it done. What was it, 2021, year after COVID? With Kenneth Walker, took the college football by storm. And then things fell apart for a lot of different reasons. But quarterback play was definitely a big reason there. They didn't have the consistency. I think Childs gives them a quarterback that he can grow with in this program. And I think the trend line is all the way up on him. He is arguably, the most hyped up quarterback, was one of the most hyped up quarterbacks from the transfer portal this year. And there's good reason for that. We saw it in glimpses in Corvallis. I think we'll see it more consistently in East Lansing. Give me Aiden Childs at number 9.
We agree. I have Aiden Childs at number 9 as well.
Nice.
All right. Michigan State quarterback, transfer from Oregon State. Following his coach, as you mentioned, Jonathan Smith from Oregon State. Man, I find that, okay. So I grew up going to Oregon State's football camp every summer.
Really?
I actually was born in Hastings, Nebraska. My dad's job took me to the state of Washington when I was 3. So I grew up in the state of Washington, ages 3 to 18. And so for 4 straight years, we went to Oregon State's football camp. And 2000, Jonathan Smith was the quarterback. Ken Simonton was the running back. TJ Hushmanzada, Chad Ochocinco were the wide receivers.
Nice.
Lost 1 game all year, last second field goal on the road, to a team in Washington that won the Pac-10 championship, beat Purdue and Drew Brees, Big Ten champs, back when that mattered. Matchup was happening in the Rose Bowl, won the Rose Bowl, finished number 4 in the country. Oregon State finished 5th. Okay. Wow. So I remember that season very well. Jonathan Smith, being a former quarterback at Oregon State, being the guy who took Oregon State from really, really struggling to being pretty freaking good recently. Oh, man. How crazy is the world of college football that Oregon State, their program is just so much a question mark right now that guy would leave and go to Michigan State, which, as you pointed out, they have hot starts. They have a lot of talent. They have a hard time finding that word consistency you mentioned earlier. Okay. And as seasons go along, they sometimes tend to fizzle down the stretch. It's been a theme they've had, honestly, for decades. Okay. I played with a guy, he was drafted same year as me, Cliff Ryan. He was a nose guard from Michigan State. One of our first days of rookie mini camp, he's like, man, we always start hot and then we just suck at the end. Those were his words, not mine. And I've never forgotten that. So anyways, it's interesting that Jonathan Smith would choose to leave Oregon State to go, and Michigan State's a good school, but after his history there, man,
college his alma mater,
dude, and realignment and building up that program, it's so crazy to me. All right, quarterback itself, there's a strong argument to be made, and you alluded to this, that Childs and Raiola may be the two most just purely physically talented quarterbacks in the entire Big Ten. We just look at talent.
We get behind that.
Yeah, and Childs, as you mentioned, little Raiola can run. He's more in the pocket. Childs can just flat out take off and run. All right, 4-star recruit, number 7 quarterback in the 2023 recruiting class. All right, 9 games so far, 24-35 passing, 309 yards, 8.8 yards per attempt, 4 touchdowns, 0 INTs. I love the taking care of the ball part. 17 rushes, 79 yards, and 3 rushing touchdowns. I think Jonathan Smith and Childs make Michigan State very intriguing, interesting, and fun to look forward to watching next fall. And I love that our number 9s are what was it, 5 through 8, very different. Okay, very different, but number 9 matched.
9 matched, cool. Right? Yeah, no, it's a good point. That, so. And I think we'll definitely have some alternate opinions, all right, as we get through 10 through 18, which I'm excited to do with you next week, buddy.
Yeah, it's interesting because as you get through 13, you've got a guy you already mentioned who was a MAC Player of the Year, a guy who came from the FCS level, who was the leading passer in all of FCS coming up to the Big Ten. So we'll talk about them next week. Cheap plug for next week. Tune in, ladies and gentlemen.
Let's go.
All right, check out Jacobson Seed Company. Check them out, jacobsonseed.com. They are your healthy hybrid advantage. Also, Bonzel Pools. All right, pools, hot tub, saunas. Check them out at bonzelpool.com. I've been Adam Carricker. He's been Rhett Lewis. Thank you for joining us on another edition of the Big Ten Show. We'll see you next week.